So I have a 6-hour compressed eating window. That's the time that I'm taking in calories. The other 18 hours is when all the good stuff happens in the body.
What is health and what is fueling us with good nutrients versus just helping us cope with feelings?
So a lot of people choose a compressed eating window. I get up in the morning, I have a cup of coffee at 6:30, 6:45. I read 2 papers, I do a couple of crossword puzzles and things like that to get my brain going for the day. Then I go to work. I might break at 9:30 or 10 to go do a workout. I do the workout clearly fasted. I don't eat after the workout. And I don't eat my first meal till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's typically a salad with some kind of protein on it and a healthy fat on the dressing. And then I eat my last meal of the day around 7. So I have a 6-hour compressed eating window. That's the time that I'm taking in calories. The other 18 hours is when all the good stuff happens in the body. That's when the body goes, hey, I'm going to burn off some stored body fat. I'm going to repair some of the damage to the cells. I'm going to do some house cleaning in the cells. I'm going to actually consume some of the damaged proteins and some of the damaged fats. I might do some repair to the DNA because all this stuff happens in the absence of calories, right? So that's the concept of intermittent fasting, the concept of reduced or compressed eating windows has become kind of the new way of looking at fuel and energy systems in the body, but you have to have done the work to build the metabolic machinery. Right. Because once again, hunger just takes everything off the table. Hunger destroys this whole concept. The fact that you can create a system that so suppresses hunger that you have to sometimes think, oh, geez, I haven't eaten. It's 4 o'clock. I haven't eaten yet today.
Yeah.
Maybe I better eat something, right? I could go all tonight or tomorrow, but I'll eat something. Is a whole different concept from being tied to this 3 meals a day. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. If I don't eat breakfast, then I'm off to a bad start and my metabolism won't fire. By the way, one of the things that I find fascinating, and this is part of my research in this book, this sort of assumption that we need to build a fast-burning metabolism. Like that's what I want, is a fast-burning metabolism, right? Where did that come from? Because that's so, again, antithetical to conservation, to conserving energy, and yet most people would say, what's the most amount of food I can eat at this meal and not gain weight and not feel like crap? You know, what's the most amount that I can eat?
Right.
Most people, a lot of people, I go to the gym and I see people on the treadmill, like 450 calories read out on the LED or 600. Dude, you're like sweating and struggling and suffering. Why do you do that? You know what the answer is? Because I like to eat.
Oh.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
Dude,
it hurts.
you would rather put yourself through that amount of misery just so you can take a couple of more bites of something you probably shouldn't eat in the first place? And yet, this is how people tend to kind of orchestrate their day and live their lives. There's this inherent gluttony in Americans in particular. Yes, we're hardwired to overeat, but that's a survival mechanism from 2 million years ago. Yes, we're hardwired to be able to burn that off, but we have to train ourselves to do that. So, I just find it fascinating that people would say, so I'm in the gym mostly to build a fast metabolism. I want to waste food. I want food to pass through me quickly. You know, I don't want to absorb it. I want to be able to eat as much food as I possibly can. And look, I enjoy food as much as the next guy. In fact, I make a bold and brave statement. I mean, look, I enjoy every bite of food I put in my mouth. I don't eat anything that doesn't taste great, you know, because I want to and I deserve it. And it's my, you know, it's one of my great pleasures in life.
Yeah.
But I also know when to cut it off. I know when I'm no longer hungry for the next bite. Yeah. You know, there's a certain, I don't know, intuitive understanding that, you know, there's going to be food whenever I want it. So I don't need to finish my plate just because there's more food on the plate. I can easily wrap it up, take it home. I can easily, you know, share it with my partner. I can easily give it away to whatever. I can easily just throw it down the disposal. I really don't need to eat everything that's on my plate all the time. That's one of the things I've noticed about myself over the past year and a half of doing this, is I get by on probably 35% fewer calories than I thought I needed, certainly than I used to eat, even as recently as 4 or 5 years ago. And it's like, again, it's so...
That's conditioning. You know, I remember when I was a kid, you know, same thing, if it's on your plate, eat it all.
Yeah.
You know, and instead today, sometimes we'll use ourselves as the garbage disposal or the trash can.
No, I mean, and again, like you go to somebody's house and they serve you this big piece of cheesecake and your brain goes, well, they must think that's a serving size, so I'm going to have to, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
I have permission to finish that, you know? And somebody else might give you a tiny little sliver and the same thing. Oh, that's a serving size, I'll finish that. What makes the difference is, you know, how your brain responds to this food. So with a piece of rich, creamy cheesecake, you might, the first bite might be, oh my God, that is so good.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm going to partake of that. But so that first bite might be a 10 on a scale of 10. Then the second bite, it might be, you know, it's an 8. Okay,
Yeah.
I got it. I got the tanginess. I got the sense of it. By the time you get to the third or fourth bite, it's a 5 or 6 or a 4 maybe. And now we're just arguing over, you know, how much you can stuff down your gullet. You got the sense of what it was. You got the sweetness. You got the tartness. You got the experience. Where does it end? Where does it stop? So that's kind of a skill that we develop within this keto reset program, is like understanding, you know, where the satiety factor ends, and you're just becoming a human garbage disposal and gluttonous. And you know, sometimes nothing bad will happen from you having consumed that.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh my God, you've screwed everything up. It's just, what's the point?
Yeah.
And if you've cleaned up your act, you'll also get to the point where you go, you know what, I know that if I have more than, say, 3 or 4 bites, my heart's going to start racing. I'm going to start sweating. I'm going to start secreting some insulin. I'm going to start doing, you know, I'm going to go back to a pattern that is uncomfortable to me. Yeah. And it's going to last for a couple of hours. So is 3 extra minutes of gluttonous pleasure worth 4 or 5 hours of like, no, geez, I probably shouldn't have done that, you know?
Yeah.
Because you've become so attuned to nutritious, nutrient-dense, good food. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm just thinking about, I think we just created a new T-shirt here, Human Garbage Disposal.
Yeah.
Like for the holidays, you know, put that shirt on, just let it be known that's what you're gonna do, you know?
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. And and I don't wanna forget this, when you mentioned about training and then essentially fasting until your feeding window after that, it immediately reminded me of something I came across a while back about human growth hormone being upregulated with that. Do you know anything about that?
Of course. So that's another just side benefit of not eating, is human growth hormone and testosterone get pulsed up a little bit. The way I utilize that in my training is that's why I train fasted. So when you do a let's say you do a heavy leg day, or you do a full body workout, Metcon type workout once or twice a week, the reason you're doing that is to get better. You're not doing it to beat yourself up, unless you love that kind of stuff. And you might be a CrossFitter who does that every single day. But and I'm not picking on CrossFit, I'm just saying 3 days on, 1 day off, that's a lot of work, right? Yeah. So conceivably, you're doing this because you want to get stronger. Well, how do you get stronger? Well, you get this hormetic stress, this acute stress that we talked about earlier. You get micro tears in the muscle. It's all good, provided you get this upregulation, this pulse of human growth hormone and testosterone. And that's what's going to cause the muscles to get stronger and bigger, and bring the amino acids in to create the new muscle tissue, or to repair the damaged muscle tissue. Now, one of the things that blunts this pulse of growth hormone and testosterone is insulin.
Yeah.
And so the concept of a post-workout meal, and again, there's no right or wrong answer here. These are just choices.
Yeah.
So one choice in the old day, my old way of doing this would have been, all right, I just did a hard workout, and it was like, 10-mile run hard, or it was 8 times 1 mile on the track with a half-mile rest in between, and I've exhausted all my glycogen,
right,
and I got to go run 20 easy tomorrow, easy being a relative term.
Yeah.
So
I'm
going to go replenish my glycogen stores. So in replenishing my glycogen stores, to be able to do it again the next day, that was probably a smart move. Now, conversely, in the gym, you go, well, I did a heavy leg day. I want my muscles to repair. I'm not going to repeat this thing tomorrow, because if I did it right, I won't even be able to do it for 3 more days. I'll move on to a different body part. But you know what I mean? I won't be able to do it. I'll have done enough work that I'm so sore that I need to spend the time to repair. So the last thing I want to do is blunt that hormonal response with the growth hormone and the testosterone by taking a post-workout meal. Because by taking a post-workout meal, all that's going to do is increase my glycogen. But I'm going to build back glycogen anyway regardless of whether I eat or not, I'm still going to replenish glycogen. It's just going to take a little bit longer. But as long as I'm not going to do it tomorrow, then I don't care that it takes 2 days or 3 days, because I'll be at the same place in terms of glycogen if I do a hard workout, another leg set, in 3 or 4 days, that I would have been had I done the post-workout meal. But now, by choosing not to do that, I'm taking advantage of this ketogenic type response, which is a pulsing growth hormone and testosterone, and a maximizing of the benefits of the workout.
So the reason I call my book Aging in Reverse is, imagine if we didn't have all that outside noise around aging. Because when I say aging, especially to women, what comes up for them is they don't want to be that, or they feel dated or has been. So people want to fight. Like, I need to look 20 forever. I need to look 30 forever. But that doesn't have to be the way. And I'm not saying go accept and age gracefully either. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is it doesn't have to look a certain way. Aging can look like whatever you want it to look like.
Yeah, absolutely.
It could be your powerful years. It could be the years that you get stronger. It could be the years where you learn more, where you become more authentic, where you have more fun. It could be all of those things. But it starts with that shift of like, okay, what am I telling myself about this? What am I deciding? What do I want? And where am I finding evidence to support things? Like, if you're finding evidence all day long that, hey, 40s, 50s, 60s is bad, and that's what you keep programming yourself, of course you're going to set yourself up for issues. Absolutely. But when you look for the opposite and you validate that people can be healthy, can be strong, can be vibrant, can do these things, it starts to shift your perspective on that as well.
Oh, so good, so powerful, and so real. And this is something I've been thinking a lot about as well recently, is that we are bombarded with messages of aging is, because of all the examples, and also even the way we've grown up and seeing the aging of our parents, our grandparents. And there are folks who, they are needing assistance in their 50s and 60s, and maybe their, arthritis so bad they're in a wheelchair or a cane. But then there's also these examples of people who are in their 70s and 80s who are running marathons and competing in Spartan races and, living their best life.
So what are you going to decide to make your norm? Like, that's the thing. Like, I hate statistics. I hate when doctors say, well, statistically, you have an X% chance to live, or you have % chance of this happening. Like, I hate that, because you could be the 1%, you could be the 2%. Like, get rid of that and just go for, like, where's the evidence of the one that's overcome this? With my leg, with that happening in my back and my leg, I instantly could have said, oh, I can't work out anymore. I'm not going to, this is just what happens. And you know what? No one would have challenged me. I could have enrolled the whole world on why my leg doesn't work and I can't work out anymore and I can't do this and I'm going to do a whole nother career. That could have easily been done. But that is not fully living and aging in reverse. And I interviewed a woman on my podcast, Janine Shepherd, and her story really stuck with me, because she was an Olympic athlete. She was training for the Olympics. She was hit by a truck training for the Olympics. Imagine this. Totally paralyzed, airlifted to a hospital, told she would never walk again by multiple doctors, told this. Every reason to believe that. She refused to listen to it. She found evidence of others that could retrain their brain, and she is a documented walking paraplegic now. A walking paraplegic. Wow. There's been movies about her, all because she decided and refused to let in the noise that wasn't going to happen for her. And when I heard that story, when I interviewed her, when I met her in person, it's like, how can I stay caught up on my leg with that? Like, really, how can I stay caught up on that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So again, just get this message. We have to tune into different stories, and not get caught up on the societal norms and conditions, because the reality is, for centuries prior to this, there was a whole different experience in aging. And people think like, oh, well, we live a lot longer now. That's taking it, when we're talking about the average, we're taking into consideration, a lot of people dying a lot younger, due to, not having access to healthcare and, clean processes and this kind of things, infection. But we actually see, if we look at indigenous cultures, folks who are much older, still out kicking it, dancing with the kids, being a contributing part of the society. And today it's just a different story.
And let me tell you, that's a perfect example too. If you look at years ago, somebody had to decide it was possible to live longer, right? That had to happen. I have a vision that 100 years from now, 50 and 60 is not going to be old. Like, that will still be young. People will still be having kids then, maybe. That'll still be your youth. Because 100 years ago, it was very different, the life expectancy. 150, 200 years ago, totally different story. So you have to have that vision and that willingness to step out of what you've been told or what you've believed and look at there's another possibility. And here's the thing, right or wrong, you might not agree with me, okay? But right or wrong, what does it hurt to believe that? Like, seriously, like if you want to give in to excuses and validating and saying it's not possible and argue with me, great. Is that make your life any better? Because we've just taken away any possibility. If I say, you know what, you're right. Your thyroid, you're this, your metabolism, you're right, it sucks. You're right, your hormones are shot. You're right. You're just going to be overweight now. You're right, you're going to be in pain forever. You're right. Like, what does that do for you? What kind of life is that? That's a life without hope. Like, so to me, validating excuses serves no purpose. It literally serves no purpose. It makes you temporarily feel better in a moment. It does not do anything to help you live a bigger life. And for me, I'm taking a stand for people to have a bigger life, because validating excuses is doing a disservice to people.
I love this so much. And this is why I love the book, because you're working on the stuff that really matters, because we hang on so tightly to our stories of limitation.
Yes.
And it's just like, because it's a sense of certainty in our lives. You know, things have been this way, but they'll continue to be this way. You know, your past will equal your future if that's where you decide to live. And helping people to become more aware and to shift from these limiting perspectives that we have, these self-imposed stops, is huge in giving us freedom.
So what's interesting, and because I do talk about food in here, and I talk about planning your plate, and what's funny is a lot of times somebody will say, well, I'm getting older, so I'm gaining weight. And what they're failing to see is how they ate and acted maybe younger. Maybe it wasn't the best way either. It's just that they were younger, so it made it a little bit easier. So it's not that it's not possible. It's just that now we really do get to look at what is health and what is fueling us with good nutrients versus just, helping us cope with feelings. So food and nutrients take on a whole new meaning, because if you practice conscious eating and you're really eating with foods that are going to help keep you vibrant and young and energetic and focused, it's just a win-win situation. It's the perfect winning formula.
Absolutely. Well, I can't have you here and not talk a little bit about the Plan Your Plate, because you've got an interesting take on fasting, which we know, we've talked about this on the show before, many different benefits, but there's different flavors of it.
Totally.
For us to take on for ourselves.
Totally. So first, the premise of what I teach with eating is an unprocessed natural food diet. That's step one. So eating real natural foods. And what I tell people is to focus on adding in more of the good, which makes less room for the bad. So instead of going extreme with, I can't have all these things, look at can I add in more of the good? So unprocessed natural real food is my first rule. My second rule is about looking at foods that cause inflammation, because we want to lessen that, especially as we age, right? So I want to set your body up to win. So by feeding you fast food and processed junk, I'm not setting you up to win, because if you do have an injury or you have inflammation, it's just going to get worse. Right. So why not eat foods that are going to fight against that? So I take inflammation really seriously, and I take foods that are known to cause inflammation out of the plan. And then the fasting thing, I'm not against fasting. I'm not for or against it, but here's what I do know. When you give your body a break from digestion and you give your body a break from secreting insulin, you are going to lose fat and have better focus and more energy. And when we're constantly eating and constantly making our bodies work to deal with that, we are going to be in a state of foggy brain and fat storage and all of that. So the reason I talk about what I call modified fasting versus full on fasting or intermittent fasting is I want things that can be a lifestyle for people. So traditional intermittent fasting, you eat all your food in 4 to 6 hours, really. And that's just not even really doable for a lot of people. I mean, if it is, great, but that's very hard to do. Yeah. So what I teach is giving your body a break. So let's say you eat your last meal at 6, you wouldn't eat till 6 again the next day, which is just a 12-hour overnight thing, which at least gives your body a break. And then also giving your time a longer space between meals. So rather than having the 6 to 8 meals a day, we have 2 or 3 meals a day.
What I always tell my patients, and I see incredible results, is eat real foods. Don't eat food like products. Eat foods as you find them in nature, and try to have variability in species and in colors of plants mostly, but I'm also convinced that there is nothing wrong with good animal protein. So as long as the animals that it comes from are living in the wild just like nature designed them to live, and eating what nature designed them to eat. Yeah. So I don't want to confuse people with too many names and too many things. You know, you go on Instagram, and there's all these geniuses. I mean, I love them. They're all colleagues of mine. Some of them are friends of mine, and they break it down. You know, but it's kind of confusing. I like to take a simpler approach and say, you know what? Imagine that you were living in nature. What would you find? What would you be eating? You wouldn't be eating things from cans and bottles and bags and boxes. You'd be eating plants and animals. So do that.
I love you. This is the answer. You know, these are the type of things folks ask me about when I'm doing media. But the truth is, there aren't specific, you know, just eat these 3 foods for liver detoxification. It's really an approach. It's a framework, which is to eat diversity. And also that diversity is going to help with our gut diversity too, right?
You know what I'm detecting, what I'm sensing and seeing, witnessing, is that you know, we say food is medicine, but people are thinking of it as medication, not medicine. Mm-hmm. So they want to do. They ask me all the time, what food is good for this? I said, well, there are of course foods that have more value of certain nutrients than others, but it's not like you can continue your life as it is and eat more blueberries and then you'll be fine. So you treat food as medicine but not as medication. And this obsession with knowing that every component of every food so that you can have more of that if you're this or that, I think it's good when you already are doing the basic things, right? But if you take it isolated, then you're turning food into medication and not medicine.
To pivot from that sentiment, something else that is invisible but very real. It's like it's a deeper translation of energy in our bodies. All of this is really operating on these electrical impulses. And you being somebody who specialized in cardiology, you understand that better than most people. Can we talk about the electrical nature of cellular communication, of organs, even the gut?
Really, we are electrical beings, right? Because when you go down and start breaking down the cell into molecules and the molecules into atoms and the atoms into subatomic particles, it's very similar to electricity. And so we are electrical beings. Everything is governed by electricity, right? The heart is governed by electricity. The way that you know if a cell is dead or alive is if there is an electrical difference between the inside and the outside. So electricity really is the sign of life. How do you measure if somebody's brain is working? An electroencephalogram. How do you measure if a heart is working? An electrocardiogram. So electricity is really what is. We are made of electricity, but we're also governed by electricity.
Can you share how this impacts the gut specifically? Does this influence the movement of things, that electrical currency?
So one of the things that the gut depends on is the peristaltic movement. You know, when you eat, the intestines will propulse food down by contracting the muscles around the gut, squeezing the food down. The segment below it relaxes. Then the food gets there, it contracts again. Now, how is that governed? By the neuroenteric system, by the brain in the gut, right? So how does the brain and the neurons work? Through electrical impulses, right? Now, when that same nervous system in the gut is busy reacting to things, then it ain't gonna have the resources or the attention to put. And what is the result for a lot of people? Constipation, which is again a global pandemic, right? And so hindering to our wellness, right? Because it's like not being able to take the garbage. Imagine in your house, if you accumulate the garbage and you never take it out, you wouldn't be able to live. And that is what happens at a cellular level when constipation is the case. How is constipation resolved? By resolving the electrical activity in the gut. Now, but that is also connected to a lot of things.
Yeah. Let's just say there's a breaker on the amount of electricity that we can generate. And in our culture, a lot of that electrical energy is being used for digestion constantly, and the digestion of abnormal things, our body trying to figure it out and using so much of that electrical energy. Could this be a reason why that energy, in a sense, is it's getting siphoned for this, and it's being pulled away from our ability to think logically, our ability to have empathy? What do you think about that?
There's two types of energy, just in a broad spectrum chat. There's the energy that we generate moment to moment in our mitochondria, right, by burning glucose and oxygen into ATP, and then there's the energy that a spiritual master, Gurdjieff, talks about as being stored in capacitors. And this is a little bit esoteric, but if you think about it, when you go to sleep, and you wrote a book about this, what really happens? You recharge those capacitors, that there's no other way of recharging. We haven't come up with any invention that will recharge whatever it is that we recharge when we sleep, and we know how important it is to sleep. So when you have a good night's sleep and you recharge those capacitors, you wake up in the morning, and yes, you're going to be generating ATP all the time, but it is these capacitors that have an very important function. And everybody's talking about the mitochondria and how to optimize their function, right? And a lot of people are talking about how important sleep is, but not a lot of people are talking about why sleep is that important. So how it works, what's the mechanism behind it, right? And I invite you to read Gurdjieff. There's an amazing book called In Search of the Miraculous, written by Peter Demianovich Ouspensky, who was a student of Gurdjieff, and he describes the capacitors, and he describes how there's a big capacitor and there's a couple of other smaller capacitors, and when you exhaust the big capacitor, the flow of energy switches to a smaller capacitor. At the moment of the switch is when you yawn, right? That the yawning is caused by the switching of one capacitor to a smaller capacitor. Now, you are waking up with, let's say, 100 units of energy in that capacitor. Now, that has to be distributed amongst all the systems, right? When there is one system that works more than it should be working, then other systems are going to suffer. For example, when you have a big meal and you're digesting a big meal, as you said, the thinking system is depressed, and the body puts you to sleep, because the body considers digestion a survival thing, because food wasn't as available all the time as it is now. So our life depended on when you found food, being able to fully digest it and absorb it. So that's why in our evolution we gave evolution gave so much importance to the gut, that it really takes over other systems, even the thinking, even mentation. So because these days most people are digesting 24/7, we eat all day long, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. No other species in the planet does that. We are digesting all day long. Just go on the streets and grab 100 people at random in a modern city. And of course, there's a lot of homeless people now, right? So this formula may not work that well, because homeless people maybe are not digesting all the time like everybody else. But everybody is at some stage of digestion. Necessarily, digestion is a energy-consuming process. it'll steal energy from detoxification, from defense and repair, even from ambition. And that's why we are so dulled up and so anesthetized. People are not thinking on their own. People are not ambitious. And I'm talking about not only ambition like in LA to be famous or to work and make money. I'm talking about ambitions to discover, to connect, to improve, right? We are dulled down because we are digesting all day long. I say that breakfast, lunch, and dinner is killing humanity.
We have this natural ability to want to stay alive. It's what our bodies want to do, is keep us alive and keep everything the same. So homeostasis is what often will result in people gaining weight, because they're like, wow, I just went keto and I lost all this weight and I'm going to stay keto because I told everyone I was keto. But then they start gaining weight and they can't figure out what's going on. Same thing with exercise. I've been doing the same exercise program and I lost all this weight to start with. And now I'm still doing this exercise program. I'm eating the same, but I'm gaining weight. And realizing it's very much like something we've accepted in terms of fitness. And that is, just you've got to cross train. You've got to change things up. You've got to have cycles to your training so that you're always improving. You're always kind of keeping the body guessing. And then taking a look at what our ancestors did. The food that was available in the winter wasn't available in the summer. And
they were forced to.
They're forced to phase. And so that's how we have been designed to thrive.
Yeah.
And guess what's really fun about phasing is you're that next thing that you're really excited about eating is right around the corner. You don't have to put your identity into a food. And I think so many people do that. They just want to put a, stake in the ground and say, well, I'm vegetarian, or I'm, raw vegan, or I'm paleo or keto, or whatever it is. And I think what's probably the best way for all of us to approach this is what's serving me right now.
Yeah.
But then phasing your diet allows you to not have to experience that weight plateau or the weight gain that often comes when we try to do the same thing day after day, week after week, year after year.
It seems so Captain Obvious,
Yeah.
But when you're saying this, I'm even thinking about, how we put ourselves into these boxes, and it creates so much dissonance between us too. And we can't just talk about the majority of things that work for all of us, because it's just like, paleo for life, fool. We're just throwing up our own little, like what set you claiming,
Right.
I'm keto. Well, you don't know this,
Right.
And so it's just opening ourselves up. And
it's not fun to be around those kind of people either. The ones where you're like, oh boy, they're going to start talking about their whatever. Yeah. And it feels kind of judgy. And then most of us, we just don't want to be wrong, right? Like I don't have a dog in the fight. I just don't want to be wrong. I want to know what I should do. And so we hang on dogmatically to these labels or, way of eating, when really if we just approached our diet from the standpoint of like, this is what's right for me right now.
So first of all, big shout out to, all the different frameworks, because all of these frameworks are valuable, paleo, vegetarian,
True.
Raw food, all of these things have great value, and that they give us structure. They give us these things to pay attention to. But what we're really trying to, and especially, with your new book, is to communicate, is to not put yourself in a box that may be hurting you.
Right.
And also something that might not allow for you to enjoy a greater level of health, or to accomplish whatever your with the 131, whatever your one goal is, because of a diet dogma.
That's
now,
right.
Again, not to say that they're not valuable,
Right.
which, I
save
subscribe
lives.
to many of those
Sure.
things, but we need to really listen to our inner guidance system first and
Yeah.
foremost.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that cross-training too, with cross-training your diet.
Yeah, it's
Love
like
it.
we've accepted that from a fitness standpoint. Like we just know you've got to cross train, you've got to phase your diet, you've got to, even just thinking about how athletes train. And they do it in cycles. Everything happens in cycles. Our sleep happens in cycles. Our hormones happen in cycles. You think about farming. Everything happens in cycles when it comes to life. And that's how we were meant to thrive. It just makes sense. It adds order. And it's so freeing to have that approach, because I think so many of us, we don't know that we are smart enough to figure this out. We really are.
Absolutely.
And we have permission to.
Yes. Oh my goodness, I love it so much. And by the way, so you do incorporate and encourage in part of the protocol there, that not just diet phasing, but macro phasing.
Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, in each one of the phases, there are 3 phases in the 131. And each phase is designed specifically to target one mode of health. So that ultimately what we're doing is rebuilding your gut health, helping you fix your metabolism, helping you to understand how your body works so you can really have the most energy and feel your best. But you also have to experiment with these things with some structure. So the 3rd and final phase, we do something that's called macrophasing, which is, if you're familiar with carb cycling, it's not carb cycling, it's literally macrophasing so that you could teach your body how to be metabolically flexible. Yeah. So that you can have days where you're eating more carbohydrates and then days where you're maybe cutting down on carbohydrates, eating a diet that's healthy in fats, and then a day that's like really lean and filled with tons of greens and vegetables and fruit. And when you teach people through the process of these 3 phases, by the time you get to that 3rd phase, you can do that. And your body knows what to do with that energy source, not just store it as fat. Yeah. And so we call it macrophasing. And that requires a little bit more structure. You kind of have to know what you're eating. And I think sometimes people are like, I don't want to count, I don't want to know, I don't want to track. And I agree. I think we can get too obsessive about that. But from time to time, you got to look at your bank account. You can't just spend. And every time somebody does that, myself included, I try to do it, as I suggest in the book, at least once a quarter. I'm going to spend a couple of weeks just tracking, because I'm always way off when I do that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I really let things slide. We all do. So it's no different from just checking in on your bank account every once in a while. You've got a finite amount of energy. And by doing a little bit of tracking using a simple app like MyFitnessPal, you just kind of know, okay, here's where I'm at. Yeah. But I don't want people to get caught up in, like, you probably know people like that. They're like, oh, I'm 1 gram over, and they're just miserable to be around. It's like, live.
Yeah.
Like, this is life, and your body is going to balance everything out for you.
Yeah.
That's mindset. It's so much more freeing to look at food as fuel and your friend and medicine. It can fix it.
Absolutely. Because stress, even though it has 0 calories, it can really cause some issues with your body and how it's even dealing with that food.
Yeah.
When you're so, obsessive about that 1 gram or whatever the case might be. So it's just finding that balance. But these are all things that, we have to coach, we have to talk about, because we've been so conditioned. It just depends on the person's story, because some people listening were just like, I wouldn't be that upset about, going over or whatever this.
Yeah.
Some people are,
Some people are.
And that's just one way of being, and it might have served them, because we tend to do things that do work for us, but then we get so attached to them that they cause dysfunction.
Right.
And that's what I really love about your approach is like looking at these things. Let's talk about them.
Yeah.
And here's some delicious food.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
Well, so
yeah.
All the information about the protocol itself is in the book.
Yes.
But I want to talk to you while I have you here. I want to definitely cover this. And this is something you mentioned. I think it's so important that there are going to be setbacks. Mm-hmm. To expect them and prepare accordingly. And this is something I think a lot of us don't get, because, we're looking at, we're going to start next Monday. We're going to start when we get back from the vacation. I'm going to do this 30 days. I'm going to do this 60 days, whatever. Something's going to happen.
Yeah.
At some point, for the vast majority of us, it might be, kid gets sick. It might be, something, car problems. It might be whatever. Something's going to happen that if we can just start to talk about this, that something is going to happen, setbacks are going to happen, but we can prepare for them and be ready when they do.
And not throw in the towel. So 2 things that drive me crazy. Not a fan of the term, I cheated. I think that's a term that we should use for people who break their marriage vows. I don't think we should use the word cheat for someone who decides to eat a cupcake or enjoy a glass of wine. That's number one. So we have to get rid of this, I messed up, so therefore I'm done. And I blew it. I failed. Because we don't look at other important areas of our life that way. Like your faith, for example. If you have a week where you're like, gosh, I haven't spent any time reading the Bible or thinking about who it is I want to pray over, whatever it is, you don't go, well, I'm done for now. Like until I decide to pick this up again. It's a journey, you know, and you're going to have ebbs and flows. And I also think it's really important that people understand this is not about, when I say this, being healthy. Yeah. It's not about perfection. You know, someone said to me the other day, like, do you eat anything processed? I'm like, I'm a human. Of course I do. But I just evaluate it and I think about how it made me feel, and I'm trying to eat as whole as possible. But there's going to be weeks when I'm traveling and I can't do it as well. But I don't say I'm off of health. I'm on health. I'm on this journey. Yeah. And it's just like a marriage. You know, you're going to have weeks where you feel a little disconnected, but you're not out of the marriage, hopefully. Yeah. You know, it's about just thinking about this is part of who I am. And there's going to be highs and lows, and to just remove any shame and guilt and give ourselves grace, because this is about trying to live longer and live better, live fuller, and be happier.
We still don't have a complete human genome because these missing pieces are very repetitive. And there are also little genes that were missed by the computer algorithms in the 2000s, which we, in my lab and others, we've gone back and we've compared humans to chimps and macaque monkeys. And these little genes, there are thousands of those, we think. With proteins swimming in our bloodstream that control health and longevity. We have a lot to learn about the genome, but what people have mostly missed is the epigenome, because that's a lot harder to read. You can read a code, that's a one-dimensional program, but to read something in 3 and even 4 dimensions, if you include our lifespan over time, that required another 20 years of innovation. But we now have the tools where we can. This is really amazing. For something that costs, I think it's a few $1,000s, but it's the size of a candy bar. It's about that big. In my lab, we can do your whole genome. Instead of for $1 billion, I could do it for maybe a couple of $100 now. Take me a couple of days. But we can also now read the epigenome and tell us where those loops are, where those bundles are, and also measure the chemicals that accumulate on our genome that tell us where the loops should be and how old we are. Literally how old we are biologically. Right. So throw out the candles. Who cares about candles? It's those chemical marks that seem to determine our actual age and how healthy we are.
This is so cool. So I'm thinking in terms like we need to stop celebrating our chronological birthday and celebrate these biological birthdays because they're different.
Well, they are. But the good news is you can't really turn back your chronological age. You can't really, well, you can lie about your age, but it's not going to help. But you can, what we've discovered is, we can now dial up aging, speed it up in animals. And now that we know how aging, we think we know how aging works, we can also reverse it. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to tell the world about, because that changes how you think about your life.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't help but think about myself. In my experience, when I was 20 years old, I was diagnosed with a condition that's usually attributed to people who are much older, right? I had degenerative spinal disease, degenerative disc disease. And my physician said I had the spine of an 80-year-old man, not a healthy 80-year-old either. And to get that bill of goods when you're just 20, of course, it could do a big number on your psyche. But he also said this was incurable, right? I've created this situation and there's nothing I can do about it. And we can get into the nocebo effect and all that stuff. But the bottom line is it took about 2 years before I decided, let me try to do something about this. And I got a scan done. It's probably been about a year ago now. And my spine looks younger than the age I'm at now, right? How is that even possible? You know, and this is what you're talking about in the book.
Well, that's the power of the epigenome. You're not changing your genome. You get that from your parents. But you can change your lifestyle. You can change it tomorrow. And you did. You were in a back brace as well. You threw that off.
Back brace, yep.
Yeah, it's impressive. But it doesn't surprise me.
Man. Yeah.
Really. And that's what I want everybody to know. And you're doing a great job telling the world, is that you can change your life. You can change your health just by how you live your life, even without medicines. Yeah. And it's pretty easy to do, right? But it's super powerful. And the message that I'm bringing is, thanks to work in my lab and dozens around the world, we've also figured out, we think, why these things that you're doing and people who are healthy, why they work. Because they're turning on these defensive genes, these longevity genes that are in our bodies, but they don't get activated unless we do the right things, eat the right time of the day, we get enough sleep, we exercise in the right way. Then these genes come on and they protect us, and they don't just slow aging. We see that they reverse many aspects of aging as well.
Yeah, and I want to talk about some of these things specifically, But before we do, I really want to give people, I think it's a brilliant analogy of our genes functioning sort of like the keys on a piano. So can you share that analogy?
Yeah, sure. So the genes are like a piano with 20,000 keys. And imagine there's a pianist that's perfectly young and skillful when we're young. And this is our cells are able to read the right genes at the right time and place. So that's why when we get a cut, we get a cold, we recover very quickly. But what's happening is the pianist in each of our cells starts to lose her eyesight, starts to become a little bit demented, and initially plays a few of the wrong keys. But if you're listening not too attentively, it still sounds great. But over time, what's happening is then she's losing her eyesight, she can't see the music, and she's banging the wrong keys. Eventually, it sounds like crap, and it's a cacophony, and everyone's walking out of the symphony or the performance. That's what aging is. Our cells are losing their ability to read the right genes at the right time because of these loops and these structures that we think we can now reset. So we can actually, we think, go in, give the pianist, or even get a new pianist, or give that pianist glasses and new music, and within just a matter of weeks, now you get the symphony back again, and cells work like they did when they were young again.
Wow, so cool. And can we talk a little bit about, so how does the epigenetics play into that whole equation?
Oh, so the epigenetics are, it's brand new. So this is science that you will not really read about anywhere else. The epigenetics are laid down during development. So as we're embryos, I mean, one of the miracles of what exists on this planet is you can take a fertilized single cell and make a baby that comes out with 26 billion cells that all know what they are and how to work and work together. But over time, those instructions in each of those cells, not the genes, but the ability to read the right genes, is lost. And that gets accelerated in part by not activating our longevity genes well. When we're young, we have a lot of activity. We don't need to exercise as much, right? But as we get older, they become complacent. If we're obese, if we sit around all day, you've written a book, I've written a book, we know what happens to our bodies. They lose activity, it's brutal. And eventually, the pianist has lost her ability to play it. But what's great about what we've discovered is that you can make sure that those keys, the pianist stays young. She doesn't need glasses for much longer. And then what I didn't know until about a year ago, and it is described in the book because I was writing it as we were making these discoveries, is that there's a backup pianist in our cells, every one of them, that tells those loops and those bundles what they were like when we were babies. And we can access those just by turning on a set of 3 genes out of those 20,000 that sets in motion a program to reset the entire cell.
Wow, this is so cool, so cool. So would the pianist be function sort of like the epigenetics?
Yeah, the pianist is the epigenome, and the piano is the genome.
So it's determining which keys are getting played, which genes are getting expressed, and which ones aren't.
That's right. Yeah. And every cell has to do that because the nerve cell in your brain has been there since we were young, and it's got to stay a nerve cell. If it starts behaving like a skin cell, we're in trouble. But that's what I think aging is. If we take an old mouse, 2 years old, and we look at its skin is going to look more like a nerve cell. And we have to remind it, go back to being a skin cell, you fool. But we can now do that. We have these reprogramming factors, reprogramming genes that tells the epigenome how to restructure itself and read the genes as though it was young, and cells remember what they should be doing. But old people we see, or at least in old mice, we see that there are a cacophony, a mess, a melange of different cell types instead of being rigorously, you're a nerve cell, get back to being a nerve cell. And one of the amazing things that we did by resetting the eye, so we use the eye as one of our test tissues. We can take an old mouse that's a year old and it doesn't see very well. We can actually measure mouse eyesight a number of ways. We can either measure the electrical impulses, or we can see if they can see moving objects. And in both those cases, we can, by delivering these epigenetic reprogramming genes, we can tell the nerves at the back of that old eye to function again, to play the right keys, so turn on the right genes to be young. They do it. And just a few weeks later, those mice can see as well as they did when they were babies.
Fascinating. That's so fascinating.
And that's a complex organ. We're not talking about
absolutely, right.
just skin. An eye is probably the most complex part of the body. The brain's probably more complex, but this is a big deal. But what we can do right now is pretty simple. So you mentioned nutrients. First of all, we have a theory that bears out, which is eat foods that are stressed out, which is a weird concept, right? But we do it naturally. We drink, some of us drink red wine, which is a stressed grape before we pick it. We often eat colored foods. So spinach is a dark green food. There's blueberries, which are dark. The whiter ones are not as good. So why is that? Well, stressed food produces a lot of what we call xenohermetic molecules. And I'll explain what that means. It's a terrible word we coined, but xeno, X-E-N-O, means from other species. Mm-hmm. And hormesis is a very important word. You got to remember the word hormesis because every day you should think about it. Hormesis is what doesn't kill us, makes us live longer. And it's a term that means you've got to get your body out of its complacency. You've got to trigger those defenses, those longevity genes. So xenohermesis is you don't have to only run and eat well at the right times, but you can also get these molecules from the right animals and plants, but particularly plants that are stressed. Because when plants are stressed, they're making these molecules of health for their own benefit. Right? They're trying to survive. They're turning on their longevity genes. We forget plants have longevity genes too. Mm. So a stressed plant will make these colored molecules to protect from UV and dehydration. When we eat them, they trigger our own body's defenses and you can get the benefit. So that's nutrition, colored foods, stressed foods. Organic is stressed, right? You don't want the perfect lettuce that's been not put any stress. Mm. And we need to do more of that. We need to let our plants stress a little bit before we eat them. And then nutrition. There's a lot of nutrition. Now, there's a debate every week about what's good. What I do is on the part 3 of the book, I list it out. So I truly believe that we've got to mix it up, right? The secret is not so much what we eat, but when we eat. And also what we eat should have variety. So I don't say only eat meat. I don't say only eat carbohydrate. I eat a little bit of everything. I try to avoid big amounts of meat because there's one of these longevity pathways. Remember I said there are 3 main ones. One of them senses how much meat we eat and amino acids. So you need to give it time to rest and settle down. So that's important. So often I'm not eating a big steak, but I will eat meat if I've worked out because our body needs amino acids. But that's it. Make sure that actually what's more important than what you eat is when you eat. How's that for an interesting thing to say? And what we've discovered with my collaborators, and I need to give a shout out to one of my friends at the NIH, National Institutes of Health, Rafael De Cabo, he studied 10,000 mice. And what he tried to figure out was, is there a diet that makes them live longer? And he mixed combinations of carbohydrate, protein, and fat, and was hoping to see finally what works. And he found out they all did the same thing. They all had short lifespans. But there was one group where he only gave them the food 2 hours a day instead of all throughout the day. And they lived about 20 to 30% longer.
Wow. Yeah. Love it. Wow.
So if there's one thing I could say that I've learned after reading 10,000 papers and studying this my whole life, it's eat less often. So that's the key. The take-home message here is you want to trick your body into thinking times are tough, adversity, hormesis. Yeah. So you can tell your body through eating stressed foods that times are going to be tough because your food supply is dying. You can trick your body into thinking that you need to be running away from saber-toothed cats because you get on a treadmill or you run or you lose your breath. Or you get hungry during the day. And that also tricks your body into thinking, whoa, I need to fight back against adversity. I need to fight against diseases. And the long-term effect of that, the benefit, is longevity.
We have really been laboring under a lot of misapprehensions when it comes to nutrition. You know, my tagline is the nutrition mythbuster, and I never have a shortage of work to do when it comes to the myths about human nutrition. The American Heart, just to go down a fast rabbit hole, the American Heart Association a couple months ago released their new guidelines. Well, that keep us busy for 6 months. I mean, don't eat tropical oils and make sure you're eating plenty of whole grains. And I mean, it just goes on and on and on with the same tired talking points that have made us fat, sick, tired, and depressed at epidemic rates. So we could talk about that. But in terms of of food and nutrition, we have to really unlearn a lot of what we've learned in the 80s and 90s. I think Authority magazine interviewed me, right? And they were like 5 ways they have a series of 5 things you need to know about whatever the subject they're interviewing. And in my case, it was 5 things you need to know to maintain a healthy weight. My number 2 thing after the first one was to eat real food. That was number 1. But the second one was forget everything you learned about nutrition in the 80s and 90s. Everything. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Well, maybe not. We should eat low-fat diets. Well, definitely not. We should stay away from tropical oils. Yeah, no. So there's a lot of things that we have to really unlearn about that. I was a trainer at 1990 at Equinox when they opened, and as we've talked about, and the advice we gave, mea culpa. I was one of the people telling people, breakfast most important meal of the day. Eat every 2 hours. Snack, graze, mini meals. Well, that's crazy advice. Now, breakfast may be the most important, and this is where we need to get into how you personalize this information, because there are truths in there. If you're a kid in Appalachia and you're going to school on an empty stomach, there's good studies that breakfast really makes a difference in your performance, your attitude, your attention, your behavior, all those things. So yeah, as a general rule, when you're trying to talk about people who are going to school with like in The Wire, they'd go off with a bag of Doritos and a Pepsi for breakfast. Yes, breakfast, very important meal. But for people like us who have the luxury of trying to get top performance out of our bodies and actually have the luxury of, finding organic food or finding gyms and exercise things and climbing walls and all these things that are really not available to everyone. For us, it may very well be that breakfast is the worst meal of the day. and many people have found that who have experimented with intermittent fasting. This has been one of the things I discovered over the pandemic, and I'd love to talk about that because it's a huge thing for not only energy, for weight control and metabolic health, something very, very important. And what I discovered was that not eating sometimes can give you more energy than eating. And I think a lot of people have found that by themselves. They have noticed that. Way before your time, there was a book called The Carbohydrate Addict's Diet. It was very big in the 80s. And you can look it up, The Carbohydrate Addicts. They had a whole series of books. And it was developed by a doctor. One was a PhD and one was an MD. And the PhD, Rachel, had a weight problem, always had a weight problem. And she was following all that advice, and she was eating 5 meals a day and starting with breakfast and all that, and had cravings all the time and just could not manage her weight. And the way they discovered this Carbohydrate Addict's Diet thing in the 80s, by the way, was one day she didn't eat until 6 o'clock. She just had a very busy schedule in her PhD program, whatever it was, and she didn't manage to eat. And she noticed that not only wasn't she very hungry, but she also didn't have a lot of cravings. So she ate this meal at 6 o'clock, and she notices the next day that her weight's down and bloat's down. And she says, I wonder what this could be. Anyway, with a lot of self-experimentation, they came up with this notion of carbohydrate addiction. And much investigation later, they realized that insulin was playing a role. This is way before this became part of the conversation for everyone interested in health. And no one even knew what insulin was in the general public then. But they realized that what was happening was that pattern of eating was constantly elevating insulin, which, as you know, is the fat storage hormone. It's also known as the appetite hormone. So it really does not only create its own cravings, but it also tends to make you store fat and make it very difficult to lose it. And by eating less, or by eating at precise times of day, she was able to control it. She didn't even know what it was she was controlling until they started looking into it more deeply. And they came up with this idea of eating only protein and vegetables during the day and having one meal with carbohydrates at night. That is probably a very dated concept, but the thing they were onto is not dated. The thing they were onto is, how do we manage our insulin? And if you're not managing your insulin, you're not managing your metabolic health. It's that simple. I actually, in writing the fasting course that I wrote recently, I investigated a lot of other people's work in fasting, including Jason Fung. And one of the things he does in his program is to tell people, I don't care how many carbs you're eating. I don't care how much protein you're eating. I actually don't care how many calories you're eating. I want to know one thing and one thing only about your food, and that is what effect does it have on your insulin. They actually say that. And that's actually something that I've adopted when I do occasionally coach somebody or work with someone privately. I go, let's not count carbs. There's one thing we want to know. And unfortunately, because we can't measure insulin, we have to use a surrogate, which is blood sugar. And that's why I always have clients, if I possibly can get them to do it, to get a continuous glucose monitor, because that's our surrogate for what's really happening to blood sugar and insulin. I wear them periodically. Every couple months, I get one of them, put them on, just track it for myself to see what's happening with blood sugar, because this is really the key to metabolic health that we're talking about right here. And to bring it back to energy, which is what you asked about in the first place, it's also the key to energy.
I have one on right now.
Do you really?
Levels.
I just
right here.
Mine just finished my 2 week. They only last 2 weeks, so mine just ended 2 days ago.
Levels.link/model. Skip the list. That's LEVELS.link/model. And this is giving, listen, you are one of the foremost experts in the world on this topic. And now you shifted things to specifically, let's focus on the insulin response for you as an individual versus what this cookie cutter thing of, it's supposed to be this way or that way. Now, you said this is one of the most remarkable things that's been said on this show.
What's that?
And now listen, I'm going to say this again,
okay,
but we have to keep this in context
and
understand how profound this statement is. You said that not eating can give you more energy than eating. Now, this again, let's keep this in context, and I want to dive into this more because what both of us were taught. I paid for this education at a conventional university.
And I taught people what we were going to say.
It's a very superficial look at what food is. And calories. We look at calories. That's energy. If you want to have energy, eat calories. Eat food. And it's looking through things with tunnel vision because it's negating human digestion and the fact that of all the things in our lives that require energy, that siphon energy, it's eating. When we're putting food into our system, it is a very energy intensive process and requires so much of our body's attention to turn that food into human tissues. It's miraculous. And it's not like David Blaine coming along and doing something. It's like, it's an actual arduous process because we're making food, whether it's a, wild caught salmon or a Twinkie, it's turning that into human tissue and, quote, energy, specifically in the form of this energy storage. So for you to say that not eating can potentially give folks more energy than eating, that's a very profound statement.
Well, think about it. If you've ever done a fast, even attempted to do a fast, and you've managed to stay away from food for a day, what happens on the second day? Everybody reports this. They're flying off the walls with energy. They're clear and their minds are bright. And they're like, now you can't sit, Shawn, obviously, we have to put it in context. This isn't a rule for all time. Don't walk away and say that crazy nutritionist said, if I don't eat, I'll be fine. I'm not saying don't eat all the time. We're talking about how sometimes not eating can actually stimulate your metabolism in a way that you actually perceive yourself as being way more sharp, way more focused, way more optimistic, way more engaged. And, if I'm going to do a big thing like the Dr. Oz show or the Model Health show, I'm not going to eat a big meal before I come on there. Would you? Would anybody? You want to get there. You want to be there lean, mean, and hungry and on fire. So a big meal is just going to make me want to sit back after the Thanksgiving meal. And of course, everybody gets tired because, as you say, there's a huge amount of energy required in digestion. I'm not suggesting to people that they don't eat. I'm saying that some of the tried and true mantras that we gave people in the 80s and 90s have turned out not only to not be true, but sometimes to be counterproductive. Eating every 2 hours is a really stupid idea. Maybe there are exceptions who are Olympic athletes or football players or people who are training and doing. I'm talking about for the average person, all that's doing is, number one, constantly requiring more insulin. So insulin is always on call. It's always up there. It's always got to get rid of the sugar in your bloodstream that comes up because you just ate every 2 hours and you can't go an hour without a power bar. And number two, it prevents you from using your fat stores as energy because you're constantly giving it new fuel. You're eating a power bar every 2 hours. Why the hell would it go to your fat stores? So all of that has to do not only with energy, but with digestion and weight gain, and weight loss and weight gain. And I hate to keep coming back to insulin resistance, but I honestly believe this is the other pandemic that nobody's talking about. And I know we're not going to touch too much the situation in California and with COVID and stuff, but if you look at the statistics of younger people who have been felled by this virus, 61% of them obese. And I would argue that they say, oh, they had no previous conditions. I'm not so sure. There's statistics on this in the United States. 88% of people have some degree of insulin resistance. How is that no pre-existing condition? So it's a very important thing to me to alert people. In our book, The Great Cholesterol Myth, what we found when really looking at this is that insulin resistance is a better predictor of heart disease than cholesterol is. Way better. And they've known this since the 70s. And insulin resistance can be treated, prevented, and reversed with diet and exercise and lifestyle. Dude, you don't need a drug.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
I'm now 64. I quit running competitively when I was 30, and I shifted away from endurance and more toward speed and strength. But I was able to make that transition to the point where now I feel pretty competent as a strong, lean guy who performs pretty well in the gym, but also I sprint. I play ultimate frisbee with 20-somethings, and I can keep up with them.